What is history? We're used to taking this notion for granted, yet prior to the modern world, or outside of the modern world, there is no such thing as history. Now, this proposition might seem strange, if not preposterous. Yet, if we consider things carefully, we will find out that it is the case that history was, as such, invented. The notion of history was invented by early modern thinkers. So a few thoughts and considerations about what has occurred, about various possibilities, should help us appreciate this thought that history was invented by early modern thinkers. Now, what happened before modernity? Well, we had histories or stories, historie. Now, these stories were told for didactic purposes, political very often, but in general, didactic purposes. In other words, they taught a moral, a lesson. They were supposed to help people understand how life works, how we are to behave. What about modern history? Well, let us consider one of the fathers of modernity, Niccolò Machiavelli. He writes histories that are to inaugurate the rise of a new notion of history in general. Now, these new histories do carry a message. They are didactic, as far as he is concerned, as far as Machiavelli is concerned. Yet, they are didactic in a novel way. They rely on old histories, and they are set up, articulated, to establish a new plane of reality, a new plane of vision, which is no longer tainted, at least in the Machiavellian vision, it is no longer tainted by, shall we say, myth, as we are calling it today, but they are scientific, in fact. In other words, they show us the truth about the context of the old histories. The old histories are exposed as inadequate because they were not exposing us to their context. They were actually blinding us to the real context of those stories. The new histories that Machiavelli tells are, shall we say, stripped of that element of poetry, of classical poetry, that would blind us to the objective context of the histories. That objective context is what constitutes, in fact, the stage of what we call today history. So history has the authority of science, has the import, the weight of science. When we study history, we're no longer reading old stories, but we consider their historical context. Now, that context allows us to make use of the old histories. So we go and study the old histories, the old stories, and we can see if they are relevant to our present situation, which is really something that is scientific, is a scientific context. So the old stories can help us not by guiding us, but by contributing to the establishment of a scientific stage, which in fact is a scientific society that praises that which is outside of the mere stories. In other words, praises objectivity, the objective history. Now, this was valid up to a certain point. Something has happened, something new has happened in the new world of modernity, where the new is what is the most important thing. What has happened is that old stories are no longer interesting. They're no longer relevant, or even irrelevant for that matter. Old stories are now approached not as material that can be, well, taken or not, or let go of. They are approached as material that is to be, as we say today, as we hear, cancelled. The past is no longer something that we need to, or we feel obliged to integrate in the establishment of the present. The present has already been established. The scientific objective society has already been established, and with it, the consciousness of this objectivity. So we're all quite certain and confirmed in this objectivity, so that now we no longer need to integrate the past. And yet there is the past. I mean, we have the sense that there still are these stories. These stories that linger are no longer needed. In fact, it's worse than that as far as they're concerned. We are offended by them. Their presence offends us. We could see this situation as a parallel, a twisted perhaps parallel, of the attitude of certain old Christians who were offended by the lingering, the presence of Jews. Why are they still there? They offend us. They remind us that we are not necessary, that perhaps things could be different, that we might not need to be Christian. Now, of course, this was not the established vision in Christianity. Established vision was that, well, we need Jews as a reminder of the roots of Christianity. And they are the living reminder of those roots. Fine, but what happened today then? Well, we have the rise of a new modernity that sees the past no longer as contributing to the presence of the present, because that presence and that present has already been established. So the past becomes offensive, and as such, it needs to be, this is the mentality, it needs to be cancelled, effaced. It is an insult to our present, to our presence in the new present. Thus, history functions quite distinctly in our times. What are we to do in the face of the project now to cancel the past? Well, we have resilience. We have those who object to the canceling by seeking in that past models, even negative ones. In fact, it doesn't matter anymore if they're good or bad models. They are elements of an objective history. And so in the name of history, there are some who object that we should maintain those old stories. We should keep them, and we should keep integrating them in our present, because they can help us develop our objectivity even further. Well, they object further, these apologists of old stories object further that to efface the past is to fall into utter madness. It is to assume that we don't come from the past, that we have no genesis, we come directly from the beginning, which is a position that is somewhat reminiscent of certainly at least a certain take on Islam. Because of course we know that Islam tends to discredit the genesis of Islam, the prehistory, shall we say, and see itself as stemming directly from Allah, the greatest, the strongest Allah of gods. In fact, the God, the scientific or objective God prior to all gods. And thus we stand. The question now is if these new apologists of old stories are acting efficiently effectively in the face of the madness of those who assume that we can get rid of our Genesis as a problem, that we are established, our authority is established as if ex nihilo, that is to say, directly from the absolute. The problem of Genesis has been, ironically, perhaps, been resolved in a very essentialistic manner. Will this work? Are there alternatives to the objection that I just spoke about? Yes. The answer is yes. Are they ready at hand? Are they fully visible to us? No. We need to return to a pre-modern understanding of histories or stories to be able to appreciate that the past is not only material that can help us establish an objective scientific present, and of course it is not something to be effaced. Between the madness of the cancel culture and the, shall we say, scientific positivism of those who seek to integrate the old stories into a new objectivity, the latter position is the lesser evil, yet it is no solution.